This is Francois Legault, the current Premier of Quebec, and he fucking suck. And I don't seem to be the only one who thinks that. The majority of Quebecers want this guy out. A big fall from grace for him, since he used to have an approval rating ranking as high as 80%. What happened? But first, who is Francois Legault? Born in 1957 in Montreal, Legault would rise up to become a prominent businessman. Prior to politic, his biggest achievement is probably to have been a co-founder and chief executive officer of Air Transat. He has been a long-standing member of Parti quebecois, but on the November of 2011, he would leave the PQ and with Charles Sirois would form his own party, the Coalition Avenir Québec, or just CAQ. His party would find pretty moderate success. But on the Quebec election of 2018, they have been able to pull out a majority victory. The fact that they've won is a big deal because pretty much since my parent generation, Quebec politic has been dominated by only two parties, the Liberal Party of Quebec and Parti québécois. Also, CAQ winning is even more of an anomaly because of their economic position. You see, Quebec is pretty firmly a social democracy, a place where most people believe that the state should intervene and have a place in society to ensure that the citizens have a good public services and good social welfare. In comparison to other parts of the world where the government getting too big is this sort of taboo, and people would prefer that it stays small. PQ is firmly on the center left in terms of economy. The only party being more left on economics is Québec solidaire, which lean more towards democratic socialism. The Liberal Party of Quebec's stance on economy is a bit more complex. They are the party who were mostly responsible of heavily nationalizing the province during the Quiet Revolution. The Quiet Revolution was an event after the 19 years leadership of Maurice Duplessis. Duplessis, under his party, Union Nationale, led the province to close to 2 decades. Duplessis was a pretty right-wing guy, a big believer in small government, free market economy, and the Catholic Church. So, during his time in office, Quebec was pretty much controlled by religious institutions and private businesses. And a lot of these private businesses were from English Canada or the United States. But on September 7, 1959, Maurice Duplessis would drop dead. And on the Quebec election of 1960, the Liberal Party finally won against the Union Nationale, and the Liberals sought radical change. They heavily secularized the province. School and hospital were previously run by religious authority, were now managed by the states. They also heavily nationalized the Quebec economy. A lot of private businesses were transformed into public enterprise. The most famous case probably being Hydro-Québec, the merger of 11 private companies to fully nationalize the electricity in the province. Also, the Liberals reverted a lot of anti-union law that Duplessis had enacted, and the Liberal Party would pretty much create the modern welfare state of Quebec. That time, the Liberals were pretty much social democrat and honestly not that much different from the Parti québécois. However, this would change in the beginning of the 2000s, where the party economic position would lean more to the right, towards a more neoliberal stance. The last two premiers of the Liberal Party, Jean Charest and Philippe Couillard, would adhere to many forms of austerity, cutting a lot from the public sectors. So while the Liberal Party of Quebec have the legacy of being the social democratic force during the Quiet Revolution, in recent time they have been shown to be economically flip-flopping. Now, the interesting part about CAQ is that ever since the beginning of the party, they have never been shy on the fact that their economic stance is center-right. Francois Legault has never liked question on whether his economic stance are left-wing or right-wing. He's always been extremely dodgy on this question. He's responding shit like, I'm not left-wing or right-wing, I'm just like common sense, bro. However, it's clear to anyone that his economy is about cutting on the size of the state and encouraging the growth of private businesses. Legault even pitched his idea called Le Projet Saint-Laurent, which is basically building a Silicon Valley in Quebec. At least the Liberal Party has the historic legacy of being the social democratic force after Maurice Duplessis. But why did so many Quebecers vote for a party that is pretty loudly not social democratic? Well, you see, Quebecers are not so unique from the rest of the world. While it's true that most Quebecers care that the state can provide adequate public services and social welfare, just like most parts of the world, most Quebecers like it when their taxes get reduced, and they worry about the state debt getting too much out of hand and possibly facing a financial crisis. So yes, you can absolutely sell a more right-wing view of the economy to Quebecers. It's just a bit harder than some other place in the world. I think it's very depressing how easy some politician can convince their citizens to cut on the public sector and social welfare, the prime example being Republican American, which a politician can stand in front of them, talk about how lazy and undeserving people are overly benefiting from social welfare, and that's why they need to cut it. Then these Republican American will give a standing ovation and rejoice in the fact that some people will lose their social benefit, even though some of them are recipients of social benefits themselves. So when their very own social benefit gets drastically cut, they are completely godsmacked, and they honestly don't understand what happened to them. What happened? Why did my welfare got cut? Why? Could it be because of the politician I voted for who constantly talk about cutting welfare? No, I'm sure it's the fault of Pablo, the illegal immigrant. Fuck you, Pablo. Francois Legault was able to sell his center-right economics in a digestible way to most Quebecers. His usual pitch was to say, hey, I don't want to replace the public sector, I just want to expand the private sector in order to help our precious public services, which has too much to bear on its own. For example, someone might pitch opening more private healthcare in order to make more patients go to the private in order to decrease wait time in the public healthcare. However, the reality is not that rosy because you also take away staff members from the public and make them go to the private. And you don't really end up reducing wait time, and all you end up achieving is monetize the healthcare system that is supposed to be effective and universal through taxpayers. But regardless of the reality of Legault's claims, it was effective rhetoric. Next is the CAQ social stance. Quebec takes its secularism pretty seriously, so any kind of social stance that is generally attributed to the religious right wing is pretty weak in Quebec. So like gay marriage, LGBT right, abortion, and assisted suicide, Quebec is pretty firmly on the left on these issues. Where it gets interesting is on immigration and culture. This is where there's a big divide between Quebec and the rest of Canada. English Canada has a way more open-minded approach toward their immigration. Their multiculturalism is a big defining characteristic of Canada. Not so much in Quebec. There is way more expectation that newcomers to the province should adhere to the dominant culture of Quebecers. PQ has always reflected that status quo position. The Liberals hold a more multicultural view that is closer to English Canada. This meant that they always had strong support among the Anglophone, Allophone, immigrant, and pretty much the broad, non-white population of Quebec. Francois Legault and his party has pretty much the same stance than the PQ. This is where we can see Francois Legault roots as an ex-PQ member. So you may think that this position would only attract the majority white voters, but the thing that is quite surprising is that CAQ got a substantial amount of vote from the Anglophone, Allophone, and immigrant population. Why is that? Well, this has less to do with Legault himself and more to do with the unpopularity of the Liberal Party. From 2003 to 2012, Quebec was led by the Liberal Party under Jean Charest. Charest is considered by many by being one of the worst premier of all time in Quebec history. He adopted a number of austerity measures, but more worse than that, he was riddled with tons of corruption scandals. The one mandate from his successor, Philippe Couillard, when he was premier of 2014 to 2018, did very little to improve the diminishing appeal of the Liberal Party. People were just completely fed up by the Liberals, even their usual strong voter base, so they were sort of willing to vote for the new kid on the block. Then there's their stance on Quebec sovereignty. The question on whether Quebec should leave or stay in Canada is a big important one, and it seems pretty much black and white, not a lot of nuance. I mean, you're either a federalist or a sovereignist. Well, damn, somehow cheeky Legault managed to find a secret cheat code third position. The CAQ would call itself nationalist, meaning that they want to stay in Canada but try to get as much autonomous power as possible while still being in the Confederation. Basically staying in Canada but being dicks about it. This original third position has made them popular across the two positions. Federalists were willing to vote for Legault since he promised not making a referendum. And sovereignists as well were willing to vote for CAQ, since in that time, the PQ leader announced that he would only entertain the idea of a referendum, only if he got a second mandate. The PQ always got the strong support of hardcore sovereignists, which is around 30% of all Quebecers. But since their talk on Quebec sovereignty was rather mute, it failed to attract their usual base, and in turn, they were willing to vote for a party which talked big about Quebec autonomy, even though they were not sovereignist. With all of this, on the day of the election, Francois Legault won a decisive victory, doing surprisingly well with every demographic. All that I've said, it makes it seem that his victory was like a fluke. Of course, Francois Legault and his party's own doing contributed to his victory, but it was also the unpopularity of the two legacy parties that gave a lot of vote to CAQ. The planets were all aligned in favor for Legault. Surely, he would not be able to achieve another victory like this, right? Well, in the 2022 election, Francois Legault managed to win an even more decisive victory than the previous one. Did my entire analysis have been wrong? Well, I don't think so. You see, Francois Legault's first mandate was entirely judged by COVID. Around the world, a lot of government, led by more right-wing figures, leaders who lean more toward free market capitalism, were pretty soft on COVID. They didn't want to enforce COVID lockdown and temporarily shut down businesses because they didn't took the virus seriously, or they thought it would have too much disruption in the free market, or just straight up, the rich business owner who funded heavily into these leaders would not have been happy that their workers were not working. One of the worst examples of this was Brazil, which during the COVID-19 pandemic was led by their far-right president Jair Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro did not care at all about the virus, and this resulted in Brazil having the second highest death toll by COVID, despite being only the 7th biggest country by population. So when you got a place like Quebec, who doesn't have the most hardcore workaholic mindset, if Francois Legault would have done like these other right-wing leaders, then things could have gotten really chaotic. Mind you, back in 2012, when the Liberal Party of Quebec tried to raise the university tuition fee, this prompted a nationwide protest that about half of all Quebec students participated. So if Francois Legault would have put Quebecers at risk of a deadly virus just so that a couple of rich people could have gotten their wallets even fatter, Quebecers would have been fucking pissed. Honestly, they could have gone out with pitchfork ready to make the French Revolution 2.0. But instead of doing that, Francois Legault and his cabinet took the virus seriously. They quickly established lockdown procedure, curfew and mask mandate. Anyone who didn't have a job deemed essential had to stay home, and the lockdown procedure and curfew would be slowly and procedurally lifted. But most important of all, Legault was doing these regular press conferences. Legault's handling of COVID has been far from flawless. A ton of criticism has been put on his handling of the crisis. In fact, Quebec has the highest death toll caused by COVID in the country, higher than Ontario, which has a way bigger population than Quebec. But regardless of the actual performance, most Quebecers has a favorable view on Legault's handling of COVID, and that's certainly because of these press conferences. In it, people could see Legault speaking in a language and term that everyone could understand, reassuring people that Quebec will get through this difficult challenge. This certainly helped people having a human connection with him during these difficult and uncertain times, and I really think his big win in 2022 has a lot to do with that. As a personal anecdote, I can tell you when it was close to voting for the 2022 election, pretty much every political talk I was having with normal people will end up on Legault's handling of COVID. Like, I would throw some criticism of him, and then the other person would be like, yeah, it's bad, but I think he handled COVID so well. I mean, he did so well. He really did super well. Don't you think he did so well? He did so well. And fuck it, that was that. So with another decisive victory under his belt, and with a pretty high approval rating, Francois Legault was on top of the world. There was a very real possibility that he could have ended up in the pantheon of the most beloved Premier of Quebec. But then, oh boy. Quebec, and just like many people living in an industrial country, is suffering from a cost of living crisis. Rent is too high, it's getting so hard to buy a house, price of grocery has grown so much, basically life in general is getting so pricey, while wage has not been able to keep up the pace. This has made that what most people want from the government is to find a way to ease up on their economic struggles, and many did put their faith in Francois Legault's unique vision of the economy. It's one thing to promise people things, but it's a different story when you have to deliver it. During his second mandate, he would make massive cut to the public sector, especially in healthcare and education, the two things that most people care about. While campaigning, he promised to cut on public sector bureaucracy, cutting on staffers who are doing useless jobs, and making the system just more efficient. But in power, he just make massive cut that severely dampened the public sector. Doesn't that sound a bit familiar? On top of that, the dude has the fucking gall to ask that the sectors in which he's doing massive cut should do more work. The latest one being Legault beef with Quebec doctors, which his party has made cut in the health sectors, but then demand that doctors treat patients way more faster, which critics argue would lead to healthcare staffers in complete burnout, and patients wouldn't get the proper care that they need, since doctors would be fucking too busy shuffling patients as quick as possible. Okay, CAC did a lot of cut on the public, but they don't do it with a big smile. It's with a heavy heart that they're doing that. It's all necessary to balance the budget. So with these massive cuts, surely, at least, we can be assured that the Quebec state debt has been reduced drastically, right? Well, I shit you not, the state debt has reached a record high of $14 billion in deficit. Reminder that when Legault got in power for the first time, the state had a surplus of $7 billion. What the fuck, man? With all of these massive cuts, why the fuck are we in such a high deficit? The excuse that CAC is giving for the record high deficit is that A, they had to make massive investment during the COVID pandemic, and B, they have to deal with the uncertainty of Trump tariffs. This is not unusual behavior. During time of economic uncertainty, it's quite common for government to borrow a lot of money. But then, if he doesn't invest that money in the public, then where does this money is going? Well, of course, it's going to stimulate the private sectors. So he's not using the money to help everyday citizens. Well, at least we can rejoice in the fact that the private sector is growing, right? Well, I shit you not, he is failing even on that. The most famous case being the Northvolt fiasco. In 2023, the Quebec government announced that they would partner with the Swedish private company Northvolt. They plan to build a mega factory in Montreal making electric vehicle battery. The whole thing was estimated to make around 3,000 jobs and bringing billions in revenue each year. It was the biggest partnership with a private company in Quebec history. But then, the entire thing went bust when Northvolt went bankrupt. Their money problem was so bad that Northvolt has simply ceased to exist. So this entire thing was a waste of $270 million. And this is not the only time the Legault government would invest in a company that would later go bankrupt. The other one being Lion Electric and Tiger Motors. There is also Francois Legault's fever dream of bringing back the NHL hockey team Les Nordiques back to Quebec City. In order to do that, the CAC paid $5.6 million from taxpayer money to make the Los Angeles Kings play 2 exhibition matches at the Videotron Center. The worst thing about this is that the project of bringing back the Nordiques seemed fucking miles away from actually happening. On top of that, there is the thatThe fiasco, a program that was supposed to make the Société Assurance Automobile du Québec more efficient, but the entire thing has become an overspending mess, costing $1 billion, and some estimations saying that it could reach up to $3 billion. And then there's the third link, a bridge / a tunnel / nobody fucking knows anymore / maybe it's a goddamn hyperloop. Anyway, something that is supposed to be a car highway connecting Quebec City and Lévis. Legault loved to amp up this project, but then the hype sort of went down when various studies by experts revealed that the project will do very little to reduce traffic congestions. Even though no construction has been made, the third link has already cost $20.5 million. Also, he has done basically nothing to tackle the high cost of housing and rent. He even refused to intervene in lowering the high 5.9% increase in rent that was suggested by the Tribunal Administratif du Logement. Even the Liberal Party pled him to intervene, but he decided to do nothing. His philosophy on this is to simply speed up construction of housing in order to increase demand. While this approach to the housing crisis is pretty typical coming from world leaders around the world, it is simply naive to think that the housing crisis is only caused by lack of housing. It is mainly because the housing market is so captured by private institutions, they have little incentive to make their house affordable, since they can just squeeze out as much money from tenants with very high rent cost. So let's recap here. Legault has made massive cuts to the public while having a record budget deficit, while failing in his private business investment, while failing in his other fever dream idea, while failing to make the government more efficient in doing jack shit to tackle the housing crisis. Man, there's no way to sugarcoat it. Francois Legault's economy is an abject failure in every angle you look at it. Picture this, you are Francois Legault, Premier of Quebec, and the economic performance of the province is not that good. Since you are the leader of the province, you are predictably getting the slack for this. Desperately, you want less heat coming at you. So you search for someone else to take the blame for that. A genius idea come at you, and you think you're a real smartass, even though your idea is probably the oldest trick in the book. When all things fail, blame everything on
immigrants.
That's right, Legault decided to point finger at immigrant and immigration for a bunch of problems going in the province. Now, ever since its inception, CAQ has always been on the harsher side of immigration, but the difference is that before Francois Legault got in power, it wasn't the only appeal to Francois Legault and his party. His big selling point was to project himself as a smart money guy. But since this appeal to him has been completely shattered by his government poor economic performance, then he has to amp up his anti-immigrant sentiment, since it's the only appeal he has left, portraying immigration as this big cultural and economic threat that only he can put a stop to it. Like Legault claiming that if the province is accepting too many immigrants, then this would be suicidal for the province. And also saying that too many temporary immigrants are 100% the cause of all the housing problem in Quebec. Not that it could be one of the cause, but it is the sole reason why everything in the housing market is going to shit.
Donc on voit que 100% du problème de logement vient du nombre, de l'augmentation du nombre d'immigrants temporaires.
God damn, bro, this fucking guy. However, his problem with his immigration rhetoric is that he's currently the incumbent. Bashing immigration is a pretty efficient tactic. When you are the opposition party, you can say some easy zinger like, oh, the current prime minister cares more about outsiders than he does about his own citizen. But it's simply not as efficient when you are the guy in power. It's kinda weird when you make a big fucking deal out of immigration, but you've been in power to close of 8 years. Now, Legault got a little bit of leeway. Since Quebec is a province inside of Canada, the province does not have full control of their immigration. So you can just put the blame on too many immigrants on Ottawa. This could have been an effective tactic when the federal PM was Justin Trudeau. Trudeau was incredibly unpopular at the end of his term, and his big appeal was like being this multicultural guy. But now the federal PM is Mark Carney, a less polarizing character than Trudeau, and who is currently enjoying his honeymoon period. So most Quebecers has either a positive or very neutral opinion of him. It also doesn't help Legault that Carney has pledged to reduce the number of temporary immigrants coming to Canada. The problem for Legault is that the pro-immigration camp wants nothing to do with him, and a lot of people who are more conservative on immigration are going to give their support to PQ instead of CAQ. Quebec is the most unionized province in all of Canada, with around 40% of all employees in the province being part of a union, the highest rate in all of North America. You kinda expect that an intelligent premier would try to get on the good side of trade union. Now, Francois Legault is a free market guy who loved private business and intended to cut on public sector. So it was expected that he wouldn't have the best relationship with trade union, but he can at least navigate that with nuance and panache, right? Well, no, Francois Legault said fuck that and decided to make war against trades union. Not an exaggeration, during an interview with Mario Dumont, Dumont described Legault's plan towards the unions as like making war against them, a description that Legault did not bother denying. Other than immigrants, the other scapegoat they decided to pick against are trades union, which among many things that he blamed for the poor economic performance of the province. He called their demands unreasonable and lambasted them as uncooperative and bad faith during negotiation. And he expressed wanting to use legal action in order to reduce trade unions' bargaining power. Now, I can kinda see where Legault is going with this. A November poll revealed that most Quebecers have an unfavorable view of trades union. So he probably thought that he could rally most Quebecers behind his fight against the unions. However, this is a classic mistake. Opinions on trades union change and fluctuate like a motherfucker. When there is no strikes, then most people support unions. When there is lots of strikes, then trades union are the worst institution ever. Some argue that trades unions are too much disruptive, but then the majority agree that an institution that advocates for higher wage and better workplace safety is a really vital and important thing. It's just as easy to find pro-union polling than it is to find anti-union polling. So Legault is sorta doing an empty gamble here. I think a general rule is that people can just be as angry against trades union as they are against the government. There is a lot, and have been a lot, of high-profile strikes going on during the ongoing second mandate of Legault, and I'm very doubtful that however fatigued and fed up the general population are towards these strikes, that it would somehow transition to a support of Legault anti-union sentiment. However fed up most people are towards these strikes, they are probably aware that it also shows how bad faith and terrible the CAQ government are in the negotiation table. One situation that kind of perfectly explained Legault's attitude towards trades union is the Amazon storage shutdown. On May 13, 2024, the Amazon warehouse in Laval was finally able to unionize. However, on the 1st of August 2024, Amazon would announce that they would shut down all 7 of its warehouses in Quebec. This caused a massive outrage in Quebec. Everybody knew that this was a union-busting move. Sure, Amazon official claimed that it has nothing to do on union. This was a hard-thought decision and it was based on increasing cost-effectiveness and blah 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 blah. Come on, everyone with a functioning brain can understand that this was a union crackdown. Amazon feared that the unionized warehouse in Laval would encourage other warehouses in Quebec to unionize, possibly even to the rest of Canada. So they decided to fix the problem with a goddamn rocket launcher. So what was our dear Premier response to this outrageous situation? Well, he totally ignored it and just talked about how happy he was that the Montreal Canadian won a game and complained that he didn't have yet his orange juice.
7 entrepôts Amazon fermés.
Le Canadien a encore gagné.
Oui, ça je sais, mais
Je n'ai pas bu d'orange ce matin. Pas de jus d'orange.
When he finally gave a statement on it, it can honestly be summarized like, yeah, it sucks, but it's a private company, so what you gonna do about it? Look, you could just have some fighting spirit and just make a passionate speech about it, but no, he cannot bring himself to do it since he really does not give a fuck. Francois Legault probably wished that he could be the Jeff Bezos of Quebec. He probably think that these Amazon workers got what they deserve. It's honestly embarrassing, and Legault's response to this is so much the contrary of the modern Quebec society, which was established during the Quiet Revolution, which back then it was Quebecers retaking ownership of their province from foreign companies. But now you have Legault being a complete softball towards the American giant. Some people outside of Quebec have this opinion that Quebecers are really hardcore about the French language. Ever since the UK conquered New France, the French people of Canada always had this anxiety to be absorbed by the English language. And this anxiety sorta did a comeback in recent years, with various articles and publications claiming that the French language in Quebec is declining and is on the brink of becoming a minority language. However, various experts on the subject paint a more nuanced and less apocalyptic picture. The two key points that is always brought up is the decrease of French as the mother tongue and the decrease of French as the most spoken language in a family household. The explication for this is that Quebec, such as many places in the world, has a birth rate that is below replacement rate, and the province had to resort to immigration in order to keep a growing population. So yes, a growing population of Quebec do not have French as their mother tongue, but what is important is what language these allophones will gravitate towards. And every study proved that most immigrants will gravitate towards learning French than English. Approximately 70% will choose learning French over English. Also, other studies show that 80% of Quebecers use mostly French in their public life, a rate that has been kept pretty steady since 2007. So, if you just keep an easy and affordable way for the allophone to learn French, then the French language in Quebec should keep going alive and well. Needless to say, Francois Legault did not choose to have a nuanced approach. However, politically speaking, it's not a bad stance. Regardless on the question of if the French language is really dying, it is a fact that the majority of Quebecers are worried about it. And if you want to become premier in Quebec, no one will take you seriously if you don't project yourself as a fervent defender of the French language. Legault adopted the Law 96, a modification of the Law 101, which reinforced in various ways the French language inside the province. His administration also gutted funding for Anglophone university and a higher tuition fee for students coming from outside of Quebec. All of this is viewed badly by the Anglophone, but in terms of political strategy, it is a sound plan. Like I said before, Legault had an unusually high popularity with groups that really shouldn't care about him, like the Anglophone. This was less about them liking him and more about how unpopular the Liberal Party, the party which the Anglophone usually pulled the most towards, was at the time. But now that the Liberal did a rebranding with a fresh new face as the party leader, the party is looking to uplift above their past unpopularity and regain the support of their legacy demographic base. The man leading the Liberal was supposed to be Pablo Rodriguez, but then he resigned his position over corruption scandals. Damn, the Liberal Party of Quebec really have a problem with corruption scandals? So Legault reinforcing French language law and pissing off the Anglophone is far from a bad move. Sure, you lose the support of Anglophone, but then you gain the support of Francophone who are anxious about the preservation of their language. Because more of that anxiety over French is big, the more it benefits the PQ, which is naturally seen as the more fit and willing to protect the French language. So projecting yourself as someone who is serious about preserving French could cut off some support that would go to the PQ. But then, Legault and his party did a fatal mistake. Legault government did a lot of cut to public education, and these public education included class of Francization. These are public funded class that help immigrants to learn French, and Legault austerity measures have severely damaged these Francization class. So yeah, it's gonna be hard to believe you when you brandish yourself as this warrior hero protector of the French language. But when a bunch of Francization class have closed off completely, a lot of teachers of these classes are now jobless, and waiting time for immigrants to attend these classes are growing bigger. It's kinda hard to take you seriously as this fervent defender of the language. If you are a Muslim Quebecer, it is absolutely beyond me why you would vote for Francois Legault, and I expect his support from this base to be extremely low. Like I said before, Quebec takes his secularism very seriously, and the Legault government did not back down from that one bit. He reinforced and established new secular law inside the province, like banning employees from the public sector to wear religious symbols, the obligation that your face be visible to receive public services, and very recently, banning prayers in public spaces. All of this is seen very disfavorably by religious people. You may believe that there is a big religious base among the older white Catholic population of Quebec, but that is not very the case. All of our older folks in the province have lived throughout the previously mentioned White Revolution, which heavily secularized the province. Even though recent polling showed that around 50% of Quebecers identify as Catholic, the majority of Catholics are in favor of secularism and are very non-practitioner. And personally, I suspect that a lot of white Catholics are not actually Catholic. Look, it's not my place to decide people's religious conviction. If someone calls themselves a Christian, I'll just believe them on their words. But I think a lot of older white Quebecers call themselves Catholic out of pure tradition. It's not actually describing their religious and spiritual belief. For example, just like my mom. One time I was talking with my mom about religion, and then she told me that she identified as a Catholic. I was really surprised since my parents did not raise me religious at all. Then I asked her if she believed in the Bible. She told me no. Then I asked her if she believed in God, and she said no. I was like, what? You don't think the God of the Bible actually exists? And she responded, no. Then I was like, why the fuck do you call yourself Catholic then? Then she just shrugged it off and said, well, I was raised Catholic, so that's why. What I mean is that unlike a place like the USA, where there's a very strong religious base among the majority white population, that's not really the case in Quebec. That means that the demographic of people who care the most about religion fall under the hands of the non-white immigrant population. And the one group which has been gaining media coverage the most is without a doubt Muslims. Now look, whether someone is religious or not, they can still support secularism, and that's also the case with Muslim Quebecers. Call me a woke, naive shill or whatever, but I think that most Muslim Quebecers' criticism is that Quebec's secularism is going too far compared to the rest of Canada, which, whether or not you support these secular laws, are absolutely true. So this fact alone is not enough for me to say that Legault Muslim voter will absolutely tank. What seals the deal for me, it is his stance on the Israel-Palestine conflict. You see, Legault decided to take a very weirdly pro-Israel stance. The reason why I say it's very weird is that polling showed that Quebec is the most pro-Palestine province in all of Canada. It is quite ironic that polling showed that Quebecer has the lowest opinion of Muslims, but it is also the most pro-Palestine province. Now, I've seen some people speculate that the reason why is that Quebecers who wish for their own independence can sympathize more with the Palestinian struggle for independence. I think some of it has to do with it, but I honestly think that this is reading way too much into this. The real reason, I think, is because prior to the ongoing invasion of Israel in Gaza, most Quebecers really didn't have any strong opinion on the Israel-Palestine conflict. If you think about it, historically speaking, the group of people who had strong opinion on Israel versus Palestine has been Jews, Muslim, and Christian evangelical. Some Christian evangelical will support Israel no matter what, since they believe that Jews occupying the Holy Land will trigger the rapture. and they want that shit for some fucking reason. But the majority Catholic population of Quebec is pretty lax on their religious conviction, so they just don't really care about Israel or like Zionism. And when you're not drip-feed narratives, unlike how Israel can basically do no wrong, or how if you question anything the IDF is doing, it is somehow tantamount to denying the Holocaust, then yeah, if you're not drip-feed that crap, it's pretty likely that you're going to be shocked and disgusted by what Israel is doing in Gaza. That's why Francois Legault pro-Israel stance is so jarring and very far away from the opinion of most Quebecers. He does the usual playbook of calling anything pro-Palestine as pro-Hamas and anti-Semitic. You may think his pro-Israel stance will get him the vote of Jewish voter. If so, then it's not the best viable strategy, since the Jewish population of Quebec account for no more than 1%. And by the way, since Israel has a very hard time not appearing like cartoon villains and Bibi Netanyahu is such an unlikable little shit, then I expect this blinded support for Israel among Jewish people outside of Israel must have dropped a lot over recent years, especially among the younger ones. His big problem here is that he has lost the Muslim support over his anti-Palestine views, but he has not gained support from the non-Muslim population with his pro-Israel stance. So this is honestly just funny as shit. Out of fucking nowhere, Francois Legault simply decided to give a 30% pay raise for Quebec National Assembly members. The salary, which was like $101,000, is now $131,000, and that doesn't include the other pay raise of other government official positions. Need I remind you that currently the National Assembly looked like this. So Francois Legault and his party just decided that they deserve more green bills. In case of Canadian money, it's more like multicolor bills. Predictably, most Quebecers who are living in a cost of living crisis are pretty fucking not happy about that. But Legault has the nerve to defend this, claiming that it was a courageous decision that aimed to attract more people into politics. Huh? Honestly, sometimes the grift is so obvious and fucking shameless that you can't help to have some kind of twisted respect towards it. So Legault's reputation is in the toilet, and there's no way in the entire multiverse that he can win the 2026 election. And one person who seemed to have understood that is Legault himself. After countless times affirming that he wouldn't drop out of the race, someone close to him got through his skull and made him understand that, hey buddy, you got like no chance of winning, and if you don't drop out, then you are going to drag the party in the abyss. The situation is very similar to when Justin Trudeau resigned as Prime Minister of Canada. Legault waited for his party to elect a new leader, which this new leader will become the new Premier of Quebec by default. And if this new premier is smart, then he or she is going to trigger an election very soon. Since the more time Quebecers have to deal with a premier they have not elected, the more they are going to be fucking pissed about it. But unlike Mark Carney, who was able to make an unbelievable comeback with the Liberal Party of Canada, I doubt the same can be said about the future new leader of CAQ. Sure, they'll probably do better than if Legault had stayed. I mean, with some estimation projecting that CAQ could have won no seats, it's not exactly harder to do better than that. There's no way that they could win the election, and I highly suspect that CAQ will still end up at the bottom of the result. The reason why is that no matter how charismatic the new leader is, they won't have a very different message on the economy than Legault. The one issue that is the most important for Quebecers is the cost of living crisis. And CAQ, being a right-wing party who has no doubt a lot of rich and powerful donors and supporters, then the new CAQ leader just can't simply do a hard pivot and suddenly be like, okay guys, we're going to invest into welfare in the public sector. Okay, I promise. So with Legault gone and the Liberals still figuring out how to deal with their corruption scandals, and after 2.5 decades of austerity politics since the 2000s, it's only predictable that Quebecers would support someone in a party that just mildly talk about not being soft with multinational corporations and investing in public infrastructures. And unlike Justin Trudeau, Legault won't probably get in bed with a popular American pop star when he'll soon be out of politics.